almost kidnapped from house.
This is an experience that has been bothering me for years, so I felt I should finally post something about it in case it's helpful in some way. I used to live up in a subdivision in the middle of nowhere, north of Divide, Colorado. Our gravel street ended in a cul-de-sac, and we were the middle house of the three at the end of the street, which was on the side of a hill. Because we were pretty far away from anything, I was a latchkey kid and usually was home alone for a few hours after school. This took place in the early 80s when I was about 8 to 9 years old. One day, shortly after the bus dropped me off and I got home, I saw someone pull into the driveway. I didn't recognize him, so I hid behind our wood-burning stove in the corner. He came up and started insistently knocking on the door and looking in the window. He then strangely tried the doorknob. He just wouldn't stop knocking, so I came out thinking if this guy was a burglar and saw me, he would go away. When he saw me, he asked me, through the door which had a window pane, if I could open the door, and I replied my dad was in the shower. He didn't react and said that he was here to see my neighbors, mentioned them by name. I told them they lived next door in the house on the left. He said okay, seemed a bit frustrated, and started walking away to his car. But instead of getting in his car, he started walking around my house. The house was built on the side of a hill, so it had a walkout basement. I started freaking out because at this point this wasn't normal, and I thought he was trying to get in through the sliding glass door in the basement, which was locked. I got ready to jet out the door and into the woods, but then I saw him come up the other side of the house, get into his car, and tear out of my driveway up the gravel road. He never did go to my neighbors who he said he was looking for. Sobbing, I picked up the phone and called my neighbor halfway up the street who had a son my age and used to watch me sometimes. She said she'd seen the car speed up the gravel road and told me to come over. So I took off running through the woods to my neighbor's house, avoiding the road in case he turned around and came back. Of course, I told my parents, but I don't really think they let it sink in. And since my neighbors weren't home, they said he probably mistook the house. From my standpoint, I'm pretty sure if I opened that door, I would not be here today. No one randomly drives down my street, much less into the subdivision in the middle of the mountains where I lived, and I never saw the guy at my neighbor's house. I vaguely remember my parents asking my neighbors if they knew the guy based on the description. Shorter white guy, round glasses, long brown hair, slightly balding, and a longish beard, but they didn't know who that might be. I've always felt he knew I was there alone based on his non-reaction to me saying my dad was in the shower. He knew the layout of the house, which is why he walked down the side of the house to the walkout basement, and preferred not to leave any physical evidence, which is why he didn't break in. Not sure if my neighbors knew him or not, but because of the remoteness of the location and the fact that we often played in the woods, I'm pretty sure if I did get snatched up, they would have chalked it up to me getting lost or hurt wandering around. We moved out of state a year or so later. Never heard of any other local kids going missing, but I can't believe that this guy didn't try to make someone else disappear.
Someone's messed up shooting practice.
So, I originally talked about this under an Ask Reddit post, but I think that here may be the best place for this story. I grew up in a small city, so when I moved up into the mountains in Colorado, I took the opportunity to go on a fair amount of walks out in the woods all around my house. For the most part, I would only walk the woods behind our house, since we had a very large property. One day, feeling bored of the woods behind our house, I asked my parents and they told me I could walk the woods across the street. I excitedly rushed out to go walking across the street. As soon as I got to the edge of the woods, though, I was already a bit unnerved. On the ground, I saw the shell of a bullet. I felt especially frightened because I have a fairly irrational fear of guns, but I decided to get over my fear and continue on because the case was obviously old, covered in dirt and such, and we lived by a big hunting town, so it was to be expected. The next weird thing I came across was a pile of deer hair. I, obviously not knowing much about hunting, saw it and thought that a doe must have laid there when she was having her babies. At that moment I was excited, not realizing the hair was most likely the result of a deer being shot in that spot. The final weirdest and worst thing I found was at a clearing in the woods. A clearing I didn't realize was on the person's property at the time. As soon as I got out of the clearing, I saw a large block of styrofoam with 2 iron rods stuck through it to keep it standing in place, and it was full of bullet holes. Looking around, I noticed deer bones scattered around and the bones of some other animals, including a full set of some small animal's bones, laying on a rock beside the styrofoam. Confused and not quite sure what I'd found, I decided to go and get my parents. When I got them to come, I first showed them the pile of hair, and they pointed out to me how it was probably where a deer had been shot. Then I led them to the styrofoam, and the first thing that they pointed out was that we were right in someone's front yard. Mind you, it was a giant front yard, and the house was small off in the distance. After looking at the dead animals, we noticed 2 things. Not only did one of the animals have a chain around it, chaining it to one of the poles the styrofoam was on, but some of the animals I couldn't recognize at first were obviously domestic cats and dogs. At the end of the day, all we could do was walk home. It sounds terrible, but the animals were obviously dead for a long time, and we believe that they were killed by the crazy former owner of the property we were on. The owner was long gone, and the police force in our town was so small and poorly trained that they probably would have simply gotten mad at us for being on someone's property and not really care about what we found. I'm sad that we couldn't do more, but I genuinely believe no justice would have come from calling the police. So, terrible person who used people's pets as shooting practice? Let's not meet.